She thought it was just an old, rusted army surplus, shed a cheap addition to her struggling shop. But when mechanic Ellie Reese pried open a sealed hatch buried beneath decades of dust, what she found wasn't scrap or salvage. It was a bunker fully powered, untouched, and hiding records that were never meant to surface. Some histories get forgotten, others get buried on purpose. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if stories of lost technology, forbidden secrets, and the courage to uncover truth speak to you, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's episode? It goes even deeper. The listing had one photo blurry, sun-bleached, and taken from what looked like a passing truck window. It showed a squat green metal shed half swallowed by sand dunes, rust curling along its roofline. Officially it was Lot 43, decommissioned U.S. Army equipment storage. Condition: poor. Contents unknown. It was buried at the bottom of the online auction page, past old police cruisers and busted forklifts. No one bid on it for the first 2 hours. Ellie Reese didn't need another project. Her auto shop in Winslow barely broke even most months. But something about the shed tugged at her. Maybe it was the words, "contents unknown," or the fact that no one else seemed to want it. Maybe it was the way her stomach dropped when she clicked through the lot details and saw the GPS coordinates were just 30 miles from her dad's last deployment site. She didn't know why that mattered. He'd been gone for nearly a decade now, but the moment lingered. She placed a minimum bid of $2,100 and forgot about it. 4 days later, she got the confirmation email. "Congratulations. You've won Lot 43. No other bids. No questions asked." When she pulled up to the site the following week, heat shimmered off the desert floor like rising ghosts. The shed was even smaller in person: corrugated steel walls, a dented roof, and a lock that had long since rusted shut. The padlock crumbled after a few taps with her breaker bar. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of old machine oil. Sunlight slipped through cracks in the walls, streaking across military file boxes, shattered crates, and coiled wires that hadn't been touched in years. In the corner, a metal cabinet bore faded stenciling. "Property of U.S. Army. Do not remove." Ellie walked slow, boots crunching over cracked concrete. A part of her expected the shed to be empty, looted decades ago, or cleaned out when the military left. But it wasn't. It was still full, like someone had left in a hurry and never came back. Papers, tools, warning signs. Everything caked in time. She stepped over a half-buried ammo box and noticed something strange. A draft. A cool whisper of air brushing past her ankle, coming from the floor. She crouched, brushing aside a pile of collapsed folders, and saw at a seam in the concrete, barely visible. A perfect rectangle. Her hands moved on instinct. She found a crowbar in one of the nearby crates and wedged it into the gap. The metal groaned like it hadn't been touched in decades. The hatch didn't open far, just a few inches, but enough to let out a rush of air so cold and dry it startled her. She leaned in, peering into the dark, and saw the edge of a ladder disappearing below. Not a crawl space, not storage, something else. Her pulse quickened. Ellie stood there, blinking in the dusty half-light of the shed, the desert wind pressing against the corrugated walls, and for the first time in years, she felt it, the quiet hum of a mystery calling her name. The hatch was heavier than it looked. Ellie braced her knees and put all her weight behind the crowbar, wincing as the metal groaned again, louder this time. Then, with a dull clunk, the latch gave. Dust billowed up in a plume that stung her throat and blurred her vision. When it cleared, she stared into the dark mouth of the opening. It wasn't just a hatch, it was a reinforced steel door, inset into a concrete foundation that had been hidden under a thick layer of sand and time. The metal frame was lined with military-grade bolts. Someone had taken care to seal it shut. But not for good, just for long enough. Ellie stepped back, adrenaline buzzing in her chest. She wasn't sure what unnerved her more: the fact that the hatch opened at all, or the faint glimmer of light that pulsed deep below a single yellow bulb, flickering, like it had been waiting. She crouched again, aiming her flashlight into the opening. The beam revealed a narrow concrete shaft with rebar rungs descending into what looked like a tunnel. The walls were stone, not poured concrete, hand-laid bricks, smooth and uniform, leading down about 15 feet. No way this was just an old supply cache. Someone built this carefully, quietly. Ellie exhaled hard. She looked around the shed, scanning the space with new eyes. The cracked floor, the ammo boxes, the ancient signs reading authorized personnel only. It had all felt like props until now. Now it felt intentional. She wiped sweat from her palms and knelt beside the opening again, studying the frame. Near the top corner, half hidden by years of corrosion, was a set of numbers etched into the metal. EXC 17 amperes divided by Site 6. It meant nothing to her. But the precision of it, the military neatness, made her skin prickle. For a brief moment, her hand hovered over the first rung. She could climb down. Just take a look. But 100 memories stopped her. Her dad, standing in their garage late at night, sorting old paperwork from his time overseas. His long silences. The way he'd flinch during thunderstorms. The day he refused to talk about his last deployment and burned a stack of photos in the fire pit without a word. This place, whatever it was older than his service. But Ellie felt the weight of that history, like it was pressing on her chest. She didn't want to be scared. But she also didn't want to make a mistake. Instead of climbing down, she stood and grabbed her phone. No bars. Of course. The signal had died halfway down the dirt road out here. She turned to her truck, half considering going back for gear, backup, anything when a low thump echoed from the hatch. Her breath caught. Not loud, not close, just there. Like a pressure change. Like something shifted deeper inside. Ellie slowly turned back to the open hatch. Light still flickered below. The silence stretched. And then she made a decision. She grabbed a wrench, clipped on her flashlight, and took the first step down. The steel rungs were cold against her hands, despite the midday heat. Ellie descended one step at a time, counting out loud to keep herself grounded. 6, 7, 8. The shaft narrowed the farther down she went, and by the time her boots touched the floor, she was 15 feet underground. She turned slowly, sweeping her flashlight across the space. The tunnel extended forward about 20 feet, built from tightly stacked sandstone bricks and supported by steel reinforcements every few yards. It wasn't just functional, it was well made. Military, definitely. But not haphazard. This wasn't a slapdash Cold War fallout shelter. It was precise, engineered. At the far end of the tunnel was another door, this one green, made of thick composite steel, with a wheel lock in the center. Painted stencils above it read, U.S. Army. Assesses Point Bravo. Site 6 amperes. And beneath that, in faded red, Project Conduit. She frowned. Project Conduit. The name didn't ring any bells. Not that she expected it to. Her knowledge of Army operations came secondhand, filtered through stories her dad used to tell. Some were funny. Some were horrifying. And some he refused to tell at all. She pressed a hand to the door. It was warm. Not hot. Not powered, just faintly sun-kissed, like it had been absorbing desert heat through the walls for years. She gave the wheel a cautious turn. To her surprise, it moved easily. Too easily. With a click and a low hiss, the seal broke. The door creaked open to reveal a small room maybe 20 by 20 feet. Light flickered from a single ceiling fixture, buzzing softly. Inside were metal shelves, workbenches, and a central console covered in dust and switchboards. A faint smell of ozone lingered in the air, sharp and oddly clean, like static before a lightning strike. Ellie stepped inside and felt the air change, cooler, still, like the room hadn't been disturbed in decades. Her fingers brushed over the console, dials, toggle switches, analog meters, all labeled in the same blocky military typeface. And in the center, a large red button labeled Override System. She didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, she walked to the far wall, where a faded corkboard was still pinned with scraps of yellowed paper. Some were typed reports. Others were photos grainy black, and white images of radar arrays, communications towers, and wide desert fields with strange circular patterns carved into the dirt. Targets? Landing zones? But one photo caught her eye. It was worn and curling at the edges, clipped to the board with a rusty pushpin. Her father, younger, in uniform, standing in front of a structure that looked eerily similar to this one, same brick walls, same stencil font on the door behind him. He wasn't smiling. He never smiled in those days. She stared at the photo, breath shallow. What was he doing here? What did he know? And why had he never said a word? Her hand tightened around the wrench hanging from her belt. She didn't have answers yet, but she had the feeling she was about to walk into a part of her father's life that even he couldn't face. And for the first time, she wasn't sure if she wanted the truth, or was afraid to find it. Ellie stood frozen in front of the photograph, her eyes locked on her father's worn expression. It wasn't just the surprise. Out of seeing him, it was how familiar the weight in his eyes looked. She'd seen that same look in the mirror after her mom's funeral, after the house foreclosure, after the last phone call from a debt collector. It was the face of someone carrying more than they could say. She gently unpinned the photo and slipped it into her back pocket, then turned back to the room. The equipment was cold to the touch, covered in a fine layer of silt, like the air itself had been holding its breath all these years. Every detail screamed 1,960 seconds era tech rotary dials, vacuum tubes, and meters that ticked slightly when she brushed them. She felt like she was walking through a time capsule. In the corner, a low doorway led deeper. The light inside pulsed faintly, a slow blink like a heartbeat. She crouched to peek, and the corridor beyond was narrow, just wide enough for one person, with walls lined in faded green panels and handwritten chalk marks. Every 10 feet, another bulkhead door waited, each one sealed but not locked. She moved forward, her boots echoing softly. At the first door, she paused and ran her fingers along the label. Conduit Node 1, Psychomops. The words meant nothing to her, but they didn't sound like inventory or logistics. Psychological communications? Operations? The implications made her stomach twist. The door groaned open under her weight. Inside, the room was surprisingly intact. A U-shaped desk, a dusty headset, banks of analog monitors, and file drawers all labeled by hand. Most were empty or damaged by time, but in one drawer she found a manila folder labeled Whisper Briefing 1960. 2. Internal use only. It was brittle, fragile, like it would disintegrate in her hands, so she didn't open it yet. Instead, she sat in the old desk chair and let the weight of everything settle. She wasn't just inside some forgotten communications hub. She was inside something classified, something deliberate. Someone built this with purpose. And her father had been part of it. She pulled the headset down from its hook and dusted it off. One end was still connected to the console, and out of curiosity, she flicked a switch. Static hissed. Faint, but alive. She adjusted the dial. The hum deepened. Then, for a second, just a second, a sound bled through. Not a voice, not music, just a pattern. 3 tones in sequence. Then silence. She pulled off the headset, heart pounding. It could have been feedback. It could have been nothing. But something told her it wasn't. This place hadn't gone silent. It had just been waiting. And now that she was inside, it had started talking again. Ellie stood, folder in hand, and moved deeper into the bunker. The light ahead blinked once. Then again. The deeper Ellie moved into the bunker, the more unnatural it felt. Not dangerous, not yet, but preserved. As if time had been held at bay down here. The air was cooler, denser, almost refrigerated. Every few steps, she passed another wall panel with glowing indicator lights, some steady, some pulsing. She knew enough about circuitry to recognize that this system wasn't running on stored power. Something was still generating electricity. She stopped at a junction where 2 corridors met. To the left, a thick cable snaked from the wall and disappeared through a bolted steel hatch labeled Primary Generation Unit. Do not open while active. Her eyes narrowed. Active. She pressed her hand to the hatch. A faint vibration hummed beneath her palm. That same strange ozone smell was stronger here. Not like gas. More like static. Controlled. Industrial. Not the kind of thing that should still be operational after 60 years. There was a console beside the hatch. She crouched, brushed the dust away, and found 2 levers, one marked Isolate, the other Engage, both protected under yellowed plastic covers. She didn't touch them. Not yet. But just knowing they still had power made her stomach churn, with a strange blend of fear and awe. She followed the cable deeper into the hallway, passing sealed storage lockers, wall-mounted control panels, and the occasional red phone mounted beside warning signs written in bureaucratic military jargon. Most of it was unreadable, faded, or smudged. But one sign near a doorway stood out. Emergency containment. Level 2 clearance required. She stepped toward it, tried the handle. Locked. Not that she expected anything less. Ellie paused, listening. The whole space had an unnatural silence to it. Not dead, but suspended. Like the place was listening back. Backtracking a few feet, she turned into another open chamber. This one felt different from the others, less like a workspace, more like a monitoring station. The walls were lined with filing cabinets and old servers, most dark, but one in the corner still blinking faintly. It emitted a low hum, and shockingly, had a small CRT display screen still active. She stepped closer. The screen displayed a looping string of text. System online. Protocol. Standby. User not recognized. Beneath that, a blinking prompt. Enter clearance code. She stared at it, stunned. After all this time, after decades of abandonment, storms, collapse, something in this place still expected someone to come back, someone with a code. Ellie rubbed her eyes. This was more than an old military outpost. This was a buried command center. Or worse, a research site still waiting for someone to finish what was started. She stood in the middle of the room and exhaled slowly. The sound of her breath seemed too loud. Then, as if responding to her presence, the screen blinked once more. A new line appeared. User proximity detected. Initiating handshake protocol. She stepped back. Her heartbeat spiked. The past wasn't sleeping. It was waking up. Ellie's boots echoed softly as she walked away from the console, heart pounding in her ears. The words on the screen still burned behind her. Eyes initiating handshake protocol. She didn't know what that meant, but she didn't like it. The whole place felt like it had been waiting for her. And now it was stirring awake like something disturbed from hibernation. Down the next hall, a large open doorway beckoned, lit by a row of overhead bulbs. Old fluorescents, but still flickering faintly, like ghost light. She stepped through the threshold and froze. This was no utility room. It was a map room. The far wall was covered floor to ceiling, in a massive topographical layout, a single piece of rolled parchment under glass, with dozens of pins, thread lines, and annotations layered atop it. It stretched nearly 15 feet across, and 10 feet high, a mix of hand-drawn markings and typed overlays. Most of it showed the western United States, especially the desert ranges of Nevada, Utah, and Arizona. And dead center circled in red ink was the exact county she was standing in. Next to the circle, a small printed tag pinned to the map. Site 6 amperes active observation post divided by Project Chariot. Ellie stepped closer, scanning the surface. There were at least a dozen other sites marked across the map, each numbered and annotated in military shorthand. Some had been crossed out in thick red pencil. Others had been circled multiple times, with dates scrawled in the margins ranging from 1,957 to 1,964. She recognized none of them. To the right of the map, a corkboard displayed more clues. Photographs, most black and white, showed strange aerial shots of ring-shaped formations in the dirt, empty fields scarred with patterns like radar sweeps or crop circles, only sharper, more engineered. Some photos had notes beneath them. Field stability, degraded, retrieval recommended. Others simply had timestamps and long numbers that meant nothing to her. Then she found it a photo that made her blood run cold. It showed a wide shot of a test site. The same arid soil and rocky landscape as outside. In the middle of the frame was a towering blast tower, something from early nuclear trials. But in the foreground was a shadow faint, almost blurred the silhouette of a man in uniform, standing beside a military truck. It wasn't a perfect photo, but she knew that posture, that build. That way he always stood, like he never quite left the battlefield behind. Her father, younger, thinner, but unmistakable. He had been here. He had known. Ellie's breath caught. Her dad had died with so many secrets. She'd always chalked it up to trauma, to things a soldier just couldn't share. But what if he hadn't just been avoiding his past? What if he'd been protecting her from it? She stared at the words again. Project Chariot. What had he seen? And what was she walking into now? Ellie stood in the map room for what felt like an hour, the air thick with dust and something heavier history. The kind that didn't make it into textbooks. The kind sealed behind steel doors and classified stamps. She ran her fingers along the corkboard, pausing on the photo of her father. What was he doing here? What was Project Chariot? And why had the U.S. Army gone to such lengths to hide this place? To the left of the map was a rusted filing cabinet, its drawers long warped by humidity. She yanked one open, and a wave of musty paper smell hit her. Inside were folders, most unmarked, except for numeric codes and faded red stickers. Classified. Internal use only. A few were too damaged to open, pages stuck together with mildew, ink bleeding into ghost-like shadows. But one folder, sealed in a cracked plastic sleeve, had survived. It was labeled, Decommissioning Directive, OP, Whisper divided by Chariot. Ellie's pulse jumped. This was something. She pulled it free and took it to a nearby metal desk where a dented angle lamp shockingly still worked. She clicked it on, the old filament glowing orange, and opened the file. The first page was a debriefing summary, typed in military courier font. Operation. Whisper divided by Chariot. Date, the 16th of July 1960. 3. Commanding Officer. Lt. Coral, R. Harper. Effective immediately. All research and field activity associated with O. Whisper and Chariot is to be suspended pending final review by Oversight Division. Site 6 amperes to be sealed and held under dormant surveillance status. No personnel re-entry without Tier 3 clearance. Per Directive 451 AB, field findings, transmissions, and object recovery logs are to be archived but not distributed to public channels, including Department of Energy and NASA. Containment deemed stable as of this date. Ellie stared at the document, trying to process it. Object recovery logs? Transmissions? And what did containment mean in this context? Nuclear material? Biological? Or something worse? She flipped through the rest of the folder. Most of the supporting pages were written in the kind of bureaucratic language designed to confuse, dense, repetitive, vague, but certain words jumped out at her over and over again. Signal, receiver array, cognitive interference, field bleed, proximity protocol. She didn't know what they meant, not fully, but it painted a picture that had nothing to do with missiles or fuel storage. This wasn't about weapons. This was about communication. Or something they thought was communication. One of the last documents was a checklist, names of locations marked status, sealed. Site 6 amperes was the last one on the list. Scribbled in the margin, someone had added by hand, do not unseal without oversight present. Field drift equals unstable. Ellie sat back in the chair, hands shaking slightly. Her stomach churned. This wasn't salvage. This wasn't legacy. This was a burial. And someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to make sure what was under this desert stayed forgotten, until now. Ellie tucked the decommissioning directive folder under her arm, her fingers trembling just enough to notice. She wasn't sure whether it was adrenaline, fear, or something else she couldn't name yet. Something colder. The kind of chill that didn't come from a draft but from realizing the room you're in was built for something it never finished. She wandered farther down the corridor past the map room, until she reached another chamber, this one smaller, sealed behind a partially collapsed door. She squeezed through, shoving aside old filing boxes, and knocked over chairs. Inside, the walls were lined with metal shelves, each stacked with labeled folders, photos, and yellowing manila envelopes. She moved slowly, scanning the names. Field reports, receiver recordings, test subject observations, project logbooks, and one thin folder labeled simply, Personnel, R. Reese. Her breath caught. R. Reese. Her father's name was Raymond Reese. With shaking hands, she opened it. Inside was a short dossier, photo ID, military service details, clearance level. But stapled to the back was a 5x7 black and white photo that made Ellie's knees go weak. It was a wide-angle shot of a dry lake bed, almost certainly the one outside the shed. But in the middle of the frame, half shadowed by the long stretch of an early morning sun, stood her father. He was in uniform, sleeves rolled, boots caked in dust. But this wasn't like the photo in the map room. In this one, he was looking straight into the camera, eyes hollow, expression unreadable. Behind him was what looked like a scaffold, maybe 20 feet tall. At first, it looked like a normal military test tower, until Ellie leaned in closer and noticed the array. A ring of odd, geometric dishes surrounded the tower's base, all pointed inward. They didn't look like normal receivers, more like experimental tech angled, almost spiked, like petals folding around a flower bud. Beneath them, half buried in dust, was a boxy structure with thick cabling running toward a generator cart. It looked like a stage. No, not a stage, a containment grid. Written in red pencil on the bottom corner of the photo, CH4. Whisper Field Test. The 12th of April, 2063. Ellie's throat tightened. She flipped the photo over and found her father's handwriting, faint but still legible. We weren't supposed to activate it. Not without full shielding. They told us it wasn't dangerous, that it was just atmospheric pattern monitoring. But it wasn't. It listened back. We only turned it on for 7 minutes, but I still hear it sometimes, when it's quiet. If anyone finds this, don't go further. Don't power it on. Lock it, bury it, burn it if you have to. Dad. Ellie stood there, the photo and note in her hands, her whole body buzzing with something electric, not from the generators, but from truth breaking through years of silence. Her father hadn't just been a soldier here. He had tried to stop something. And now she was standing in the very place he'd warned her about, with power humming, systems live, and secrets too loud to stay buried. Ellie didn't sleep that night. She couldn't. Even after leaving the bunker and locking the shed behind her, the images haunted her. Her father's haunted expression, the ring of twisted receiver dishes, the chilling words. It listened back. She drove into the nearest town before sunrise, eyes gritty and hands still smudged with bunker dust. Winslow was a blip on the map, a handful of gas stations, 2 diners, and 1 small public library that doubled as a records archive. But Ellie wasn't looking for a librarian. She was looking for someone she'd heard about once, in passing, an old army tech named Arthur Sykes who'd lived in the area since the early 72nds. Her dad had mentioned him once after too many beers and a night he couldn't shake. Artie knew when to keep his mouth shut, he'd said. But that doesn't mean he ever forgot. It took 3 stops and 1 very awkward conversation with a waitress at the Corner Cup Cafe, but Ellie finally found him. A rusted trailer parked on the edge of town, windows blacked out with foil, 2 busted ham radios on the porch. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again, louder. The door creaked open a few inches, revealing a weathered face behind dusty glasses. The man's eyes narrowed when he saw her. "You military?" he rasped. "No," Ellie replied. "But I think you knew my dad, Raymond Reese." His posture stiffened. "I'm Ellie. I think I found something. At the old site, 6 amperes. The shed in Sand Hollow. Arthur didn't open the door further. But he didn't close it either. I told them to bury that place in concrete," he muttered. Ellie hesitated. "I need to know what it was, what he was part of, what Project Whisper was." That got his attention. He stepped outside, arms crossed, his faded flannel soaked in sweat and motor oil. "You opened it?" he asked, voice low. "I didn't know what it was." There was a hatch under the floor. Still powered. I found a map. Logs. Photos. One of them. He's in it. Arthur stared at her for a long moment. Then sighed. "I told Ray to walk away. After 63, most of us did. The tech, it was beyond what we were trained for. We thought it was radio work. Atmospheric bounce theory. Turned out it was deeper than that." "Deeper? How?" Arthur glanced around as if the empty desert might be listening. They weren't measuring sound. They were measuring thought, response patterns. Stuff that hadn't even been given names yet. Signals we didn't send, but got back anyway. Ellie's skin crawled. "Do you know what the Whisper Field was?" Arthur's voice dropped to a whisper. "It was never supposed to activate without containment. It changed the men who stood too close. Some forgot days. Some never came back the same." He looked her dead in the eyes. "If you went down there, you need to be real sure what you woke up. And with that," he turned and shut the door. The click of the lock echoed louder than any answer. The desert wind howled around her truck as Ellie sat parked outside Arthur's trailer, his final words still echoing in her head. "Be real sure what you woke up." She didn't feel sure. She felt shaken. But she also felt something else. That quiet, fierce tug in her gut. The same feeling she used to get in the garage when everyone told her a car was beyond saving and she proved them wrong. She had to go back. Not to chase ghosts. To finish what her father couldn't. Back at the shed, the air was still. She braced herself before opening the hatch, her boots clanging against the steel rungs as she descended again. Every creak in the metal echoed like a warning, but she pushed forward past the map room, past the old console, until she found the final corridor. At the end, a bulkhead door she hadn't dared to open before. No label, no warning, just a brass keyhole embedded in the center. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the item she hadn't dared look at too closely before. A small key, wrapped in duct tape, buried at the bottom of the personnel folder labeled R. Reese. The tag on it simply read, Emergency Access Auth. Ellie stared at it for a long beat, then slid it into the keyhole. It turned with an audible click. The heavy door groaned as it opened, releasing a breath of cold, sterile air. Beyond it, a stairwell descended at a steep angle. Concrete walls, steel railings. The hum of power grew louder. At the bottom, the room opened into a containment chamber. It was like stepping onto another planet. The space was circular, walls lined with smooth lead panels and radiation shielding. In the center, a sealed glass room more like a vault, with a console on one side and a chair bolted to the floor on the other. Coils of copper wire wrapped the entire perimeter, feeding into old servers that still blinked faintly. There were scratches on the inner glass. Not from the outside trying to get in, but the inside trying to get out. Ellie moved slowly around the chamber, until she reached a storage locker tucked behind a partition wall. Inside, a duffel bag marked Reese, an old canvas folder of field notes, a silver lighter, and a dog tag, her father's. She ran her thumb over the worn engraving, voice cracking in the silence. "What were you doing down here, Dad?" She opened the field notes, flipping through page after page of scrawled handwriting, not the detached tone of military reports, but the frantic scrawl of someone losing time. Thoughts repeated. Phrases looped. One entry stood out. "We thought we built a receiver, but it built something in us instead. I can't tell if the whispers are memories or something else. Whatever we let through, it wants to finish the conversation." Ellie's breath caught. This wasn't about communication. This was about contact. The containment vault hummed softly around Ellie, a sound so low it made her teeth ache. She stood at the edge of the glass chamber, her breath fogging the outer pane, staring at the bolted chair inside. There were restraints built into the arms. A frayed leather strap dangled from the floor mount like something had broken free. She turned slowly, taking in the rest of the emergency vault. The copper wiring was thick, purposeful, braided through reinforced conduits that fed into an elevated box marked Field Neutralizer, Manual Override Only. A metal tag hung from it, stamped with raised letters. Use only if protocol failure occurs. Her father's name was on every report, every diagram. He hadn't just worked here. He'd been part of the final lockdown crew, the one ordered to seal the place and walk away. But he hadn't walked away completely, had he? Not if he left behind keys, notes, and warnings buried in the folds of government red tape. Ellie's hands shook as she opened the canvas folder from the Tevin duffel. Inside were detailed schematics of the containment room. One page showed the layout of the vault, the copper coil system, and a series of readings labeled Cognitive Echo Field Measurements. Each spike in the readings was dated and initialed R. But one reading stood out. Dated the 14th of July 1963, it was circled 3 times in red ink. Next to it, her father had written, "Subject entered containment chair for recalibration attempt. 7 minutes in, audible response recorded not from subject. External equipment failed. Field spike, exceeded safe threshold. Immediate evacuation ordered. Subject removed. Speech and memory, degraded. Never fully recovered. No name, no rank, just subject." But Ellie knew. It was him. He had sat in that chair. He had tried to shut it down. And something had reached back. She moved to the vault's far wall, where a rusted locker stood ajar. Inside, a full-body hazmat suit hung like a hollow man. Beside it, a bundle of old reel-to-reel tapes. Most were blank labeled, but one was marked in red grease pencil. "Final session. Audio only. Do not copy." She grabbed the tape and stared at it, heart hammering. Suddenly, the low hum in the chamber ticked upward, barely perceptible, but definitely there. Like a power surge. Like something noticed. Ellie backed away from the containment glass and turned off her flashlight. Total darkness settled in, except for the faint pulse of the server lights, like a heartbeat refusing to stop. Something had been buried here, something no one wanted to explain. And now, she had the last known message her father recorded before the facility was sealed. Whatever was on that tape, it wasn't just meant for the military. It was meant for whoever came next. And that person, she realized, was her. Ellie sat cross-legged on the bunker floor, the reel-to-reel tape balanced across her knees like it weighed 100 pounds. She stared at the label again. Final. Session. Audio only. Do not copy. The grease pencil smeared just enough to look like it had been written in a hurry. She'd carried the old field recorder up from a storage crate 2 rooms back. It still worked. Barely. The reels creaked as they turned. Static crackled through the old speaker, sharp and immediate, like ripping gauze off a wound. Then, her father's voice. This is Staff Sergeant Raymond Reese, Site 6 amperes. Recording date, the 15th of July 1963. This will be my final session. Ellie's breath hitched. She hadn't heard his voice in over 10 years. We shut the field down yesterday. Or tried to. I'm not sure it stopped. The voice was steady, but strained. Slower than she remembered. Careful. The whisper isn't just background noise. It's not feedback. It's something else. Language without a language. Thought without a mouth. When the field's active, it doesn't just receive, it searches. It scans. Not just outside, but inward. The tape hissed louder now, as if something underneath his voice was trying to climb through. I was the last one in the chair. They didn't want me to, but I volunteered. Said I could anchor myself, hold on to memory. That's what the copper was for, to ground cognition. But it didn't work. Ellie closed her eyes, tears welling. He'd never told her any of this. All those quiet nights, the 1,000-yard stairs, the notebooks he burned in the garage. It wasn't guilt. It was damage. I don't know how long I was under. I thought it was 7 minutes. But when they pulled me out, my watch read 3 hours. I had scratches on my arms, and I was speaking in a language I didn't know. They recorded it. It didn't match any known dialect. Just patterns. Like echolocations, only aimed at memory. A pause. Then, I remember my daughter's name. Ellie. I wrote it down. I keep writing it down. I don't want to forget. If she ever finds this place, God help her. If she does, she needs to know. I tried to lock it away. We all did. Static rose again, almost rhythmic now, like breathing, like something moving beneath the tape itself. They told us it was over, but I still hear it. Not with my ears. With something else. It talks in silence, and it never stops listening. The tape crackled once more, and then cut out. Silence. Ellie sat there for a long time, the machine spinning empty. Then she opened the second file she'd taken from the vault, a slim red folder, simply titled, Project Whisper, Internal Study. Inside, just 2 pages. A scanned brain scan of someone mid-transmission, neural spikes lighting up like a fireworks finale, and a typed note, cognitive field may persist post-deactivation. Effects are transmissible via memory trace. Containment suggested for those with proximity exposure. Ellie didn't speak. She didn't breathe. Because if that was true, she was already part of it. Ellie's hands trembled as she packed the whisper folder back into her satchel. The words, transmissible via memory trace, echoed in her skull like a siren no one else could hear. If exposure to the field could travel through thought, through memory, then it wasn't just about physical presence. The very act of remembering could be enough to let it in. She needed air. Climbing back up through the access tunnel, she squinted into the blazing desert light. The shed felt smaller now, claustrophobic, even with the hatch flung wide open. She closed it gently, out of instinct more than safety, then stepped into the sun, letting the heat bake away the chill she'd brought with her. But even here, in the wind and warmth, she didn't feel alone. She drove back into town with the reel-to-reel player riding shotgun, her father's voice still echoing in her ears. It felt like a ghost clinging to the fabric of her clothes. When she pulled up to her garage, Her hands hesitated on the ignition switch. Don't let it follow you inside. Too late. She took the tape recorder into her workshop, cleared the cluttered bench, and set it down beside a battered laptop. If the military had abandoned the site, if the government had truly sealed it and looked the other way, then someone out there needed to hear what she'd found. Not rumors, not secondhand stories. Proof. She connected the reel-to-reel output to an analog converter and hit play again, but this time, she watched the waveforms form on screen. As her father's voice filled the shop, she stared not at the machine, but at herself in the reflection of the window. There was something behind her eyes now. Something changed. And then it happened. Not through the speakers, not through the headphones, but deep, deep inside her head. As the tape reached the final segment, beneath the crackling static, a faint pattern began to loop. 3 tones. Low, rising, pulsing, almost musical. Then a pause. Then again, her spine stiffened. She hit stop on the player. The sound cut off, but the tones lingered for a split second longer, as if echoing after the audio stopped. Like memory itself had absorbed them. She sat still, testing the silence. Nothing. Until she blinked and heard it once more. Not through her ears, inside her. She fumbled through her father's old notes, flipping to the last page, where one phrase had been underlined 3 times. The field doesn't need a machine. It just needs a mind that remembers. Her father hadn't just been warning her. He'd been leaving her a choice. And now, with the tones nested somewhere behind her thoughts, Ellie knew the truth. She hadn't just uncovered the bunker. She had activated it. Ellie stood alone in her workshop, the reel-to-reel tape now unplugged, the laptop's screen dark. Yet the sound, the whisper, remained. Not loud, not clear, but present, like a hum between thoughts. Like the moment just before you speak but haven't formed the words. She'd always believed in cause and effect, gears and torque, bolts and compression ratios. But this was something outside of mechanics, outside of physics. It wasn't the hum of a machine. It was the residue of intention. For the first time, she understood what her father had tried to do. He hadn't just buried the past, he'd tried to seal a signal inside memory itself. A signal that couldn't be intercepted by force, only by thought. And now, it had found her. She stared at the folder on the bench, then at the hard drive she'd just digitized the tape onto. She could destroy it, wipe the files, burn the notes, close the hatch, and pretend none of this had happened. But what would that change? The field wasn't gone. It was awake, and she was already connected. Still, she wasn't ready to broadcast anything. Not yet. But she could document. She could give the truth, shape, language, and evidence. So she began scanning every file from the bunker logs, schematics, her father's notes, even the personnel rosters. Then she uploaded it all onto an encrypted flash drive and slid it into a lead-lined case she found in the workshop's welding locker. She labeled it simply, Sixa, Whisper, Archive. That night, she sat at her father's old desk, turned off all the lights, and opened her email. The cursor blinked at her, waiting. In the To field, she typed the address of an independent investigative journalist her dad had once mentioned in passing, a man who'd made a career of exposing buried Cold War projects. She didn't add a message, just attached the archive and hit send. It was out now. She leaned back, eyes closed. And in the stillness, for the first time in hours, there was nothing. No tones, no pulses, just the low buzz of the garage fridge and the distant chirp of desert night insects. Maybe it had passed. Or maybe it was waiting. A knock at the shop door broke the silence. Ellie jumped. It was past midnight. She moved cautiously, her hand slipping to the wrench on her bench as she approached the glass. Outside stood a man in a dark jacket, his face in shadow, his vehicle idling behind him unmarked, government grade, too clean for a town like Winslow. She didn't open the door. She didn't speak. He didn't look angry. Just tired. Like someone sent to confirm what couldn't be undone. After a beat, he raised a hand. "Miss Reese," he said calmly. "We need to talk." Ellie didn't blink. Neither did he. And in the air between them, unspoken but loud, was the truth. She'd broken the silence. And now, someone was listening. Ellie didn't move. Her fingers tightened around the wrench just enough to feel the ridges bite into her skin. The man outside waited, unbothered, as if he had all the time in the world. His voice, calm and unhurried, still echoed in her ears. "We need to talk." The desert wind stirred the dust behind him, but his coat didn't move. She cracked the door an inch, leaving the chain lock fastened. "Who are you?" He gave a faint smile. "Someone who used to wear the same uniform as your father." "My name's not important, but we both know why I'm here." Ellie didn't answer. He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a folded envelope, aged and soft like it had traveled far. He slid it under the door. "He left this with us. Told us to deliver it if Site 6 amperes ever lit up again." Her chest tightened. She stared at the envelope on the floor, her name handwritten on the front in her father's unmistakable block letters. Ellie. She unlatched the chain and opened the door fully, eyes locked on the man. "Why now?" He tilted his head. "Because you accessed the signal, and because you made a copy." "You tracking my emails?" He smiled again. "It's not the email we're worried about, it's the frequency." That stopped her cold. "You mean the signal still broadcasts?" He nodded. "Not with speakers, with memory, with people. That's why they buried it. Why your father volunteered for the chair. He wasn't trying to destroy the field, Ellie. He was trying to contain it, in himself." A sharp breath escaped her. "So what happens now?" He hesitated. "That depends on you. Do you want the drive back? The files?" "We're not here to clean up," he said. "We're here to witness. People forget that was always the protocol. Observe. Document. Let the subject decide." Subject. She hated the word now. It made her feel like she was a test case, not a daughter, not a mechanic, just another line in some classified file. She looked down at the envelope, then back at him. "I'm not giving it back. I'm not sealing the hatch. People deserve to know." He didn't flinch. "We thought you might say that." He stepped back, slowly. "Just know that from here on out, you'll be monitored. Not because we're trying to stop you, but because what's inside you now, the field, the echo, whatever name you give it, it's part of the record. And the record watches itself." He turned without waiting for a response and climbed into the car. As the engine rumbled and the taillights faded into the dust, Ellie looked down at the envelope in her hand. She peeled it open slowly. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her father's handwriting, looping, shakier than the others. "If you're reading this, then I failed to keep it buried. But maybe that's not the worst thing. Maybe it was always meant to find you because you'd know what to do with it. Just remember, Ellie, it doesn't end here." It never did. And in the silence that followed, the whisper returned not in fear, but in welcome. The next morning, Ellie stood alone in the sun outside the shed, the metal hatch yawning open behind her like a mouth that had finally exhaled. The desert was still. No wind, no birds, just the quiet buzz of a world, turning, and her own breath, steady now. She held the envelope again, her father's final words still sinking into her bones. It doesn't end here. It never did. He hadn't been warning her anymore. He had been passing the torch. She didn't return to the bunker that day. She didn't need to. The files were already backed up in 3 places. One set mailed to the journalist. Another encrypted and uploaded to a drive with scheduled release. The third, a physical copy, sealed in a fireproof case and buried in the concrete slab behind the shed. Just in case. She didn't want to destroy the place. That would have been easier. But the story didn't belong to her alone anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever been silenced by secrecy. Every family broken by truths wrapped in military lies. And to her father who'd given everything, even his mind, to hold back what others refused to see. By noon, she had the welding torch lit. With deliberate, steady hands, she lowered the steel hatch, one last glance into the dark below, and then began sealing it shut. The metal sparked bright in the sunlight, blinding for a second, until the seam began to disappear beneath her torch, not to erase what happened but to finish it, to mark it. When it was done, she carved something into the cooling weld with a punch tool and hammer. Project Whisper, do not forget. And beside it, she added her father's initials. And her own. Back at the shop, Ellie hung up the old photo of her dad in uniform, the one she'd found on the bunker wall. She placed it right above the main workbench, next to the letter he'd written, and the small lead case with the flash drive inside. A monument, not of fear, but of clarity. The whisper still pulsed, sometimes soft, like the low whine of an alternator. She learned to live with it. It no longer felt invasive. It felt like a reminder that memory is transmission, and that silence is a choice. Word of her military salvage discovery started to circulate online. She didn't confirm or deny anything. Let the world speculate. She didn't need the spotlight. She just needed the truth to breathe. And it was. In the weeks that followed, other documents surfaced from whistleblowers. Declassified fragments, unexplained sites. A dozen people reached out. Historians, researchers, survivors. They were listening now. And Ellie, the mechanic who once bought a rusted army shed no one else wanted, had become more than a restorer. She was now the keeper of a truth too big to bury again. And this time, the silence would not return.